Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden, and today we're talking about X Factor number 1. So, this is a really fun book. I quite enjoyed on the whole. We have yet another new X-Men series. This one written by Leah Williams. David Baldeon does the art. Israel Sylvia does coloring. And Joe Carmagna does lettering. Overall, this is a pretty interesting story. For those that don't know, like when I think of X Factor, I think of uh, pretty slightly more grounded take on mutants, solving mysteries. They had a really long run back in the day, though this seems like a completely separate story altogether and a different focus. I don't know if that bothers people, but personally, I enjoyed what we got here. So the cover nicely sums up our team. It'll flash by periodically as we stream, but it's Dawkins, Northstar, Polaris, Rachel Summers, Eye Guy, and Prodigy. a pretty eclectic team of different mutants from like across X-Men history, I'd say. Though, I boy, my mistake. Though they all sort of are introduced fairly organically, and I liked the general dynamic behind X Factor and the idea behind them in this world of post House of X, which is really all about them kind of looking into the new resurrection protocols, investigating oddities in resurrections, people that are going missing, but their deaths aren't confirmed. And it brings up some interesting issues that up until now hadn't really been discussed much in X Men history. The biggest of which is the need to confirm a death before they resurrect someone. Oh, okay. Easy way to. Anyways, and I say all that just because it's kind of, I don't know, odd to me that we went in this direction. But I like the idea because they kind of talk about, like, well, we don't want to have clones going on and that sort of thing. So, yes, it doesn't like feature multiple man or that crew as part of X Factor. Instead, we get some pretty different characters that haven't really been on a team together before or anything like that. Though I enjoy it just the same. They have a cool partnership with Sage, who's like the ongoing database of all things related to intel concerning the X-Men, and she sort of flags cases for them, and then they look for missing people. The first person of which is Northstar's sister, because he senses her death, but they have no proof that she died. And they start digging into the mystery of what happened and the circumstances of her death, though they learn quite a bit about it through some pretty cool stuff where each of them get to use their powers a little bit and show off. Dawkins, probably the most interesting character in this issue because he's very different than the Dawkins we know from pre House of X. I've noticed this from his character in other X-Men comics before, but he definitely feels like he's taken well to the whole second chance idea behind the Krakoan movement and seems to really have excelled, be it like with his dad, and there was a great little bit with him in I think it was one of the X-Force books. And in this story, he feels a lot more like a sort of lighthearted enforcer character. But also, what I was gonna get at is he uses his pheromones and heightened senses to help a lot in solving this mystery. So he's not just this traditional, like, anti-hero character. He's quite different from what I expected, and even the Dawkins we see on the cover. Polaris is great because she's kind of finding herself in all of this. She has a great little scene with Magneto where he's like, I hope you're not, I don't know, like he kind of expected her to lead the X Factor team, but she instead sort of insists that Northstar does it. And she asked her father to describe herself, like her character, and he's sort of at a loss of words, and she's actually pretty nice about it and says, like, well, I don't really know how I fit in either, and what my place is and stuff, and she hopes she can find it on this X Factor team. Meanwhile, the whole thing is very heavily tied into the five mutants responsible for resurrecting the X-Men and being a key part of this protocol. And we kind of get an insight into their lives and the thousands of requests they get to resurrect different mutants every day. Uh, it's cool seeing Hope Summers in a role that feels right for her as this mutant messiah that was set up years ago and then was kind of abandoned for a time. Meanwhile, it's just like an interesting pairing of two of Bendis's new mutants, Goldballs and the time traveling chick, uh, Elixir and Prodigy. What is the? She's on here. Tempest is the one I couldn't name. Uh, they kind of consent to X Factor being this investigative body on behalf of everyone else. It's kind of funny because like iGuy just sort of showed up uh, as a result of mutant equivalent of a Craigslist post, but nevertheless, uh, they are a pretty solid team. And then Rachel Summers is a fun character. Prodigy's pretty good. He has cool powers, so I expect more interesting stuff out of him going forward. Then Polaris sort of falls asleep speaking to Krakoa, which gets into what I'm sure is true of a few mutants and their relationship with the island. Because the island's sentient, mutants with a connection to the Earth, like Black Tom Cassidy, I assume Magneto and Polaris have a bit of a connection with it. And together they build this crazy tower that will be the new headquarters of X Factor, and we get a little tour of it. I do have to say, overall, though this book's a lot more comedic in tone and kind of has goofier elements to it, like the five show up and give a bagel plant, a plant that grows bagels, which is the silliest interpretation of Krakoa's abilities I've seen yet. Nevertheless, um, it's just a reminder of how cool this world of Krakoa is for the mutants, that they can build this headquarters overnight. We have this cool mix of different team members that all got to use their abilities to a degree throughout this story. And on the whole, it seems like a pretty promising start for a new series. I quite enjoyed it, and I think I would recommend it, like I said at the beginning, or I would definitely recommend it, like I said at the beginning of this issue. Where I hesitated for a minute is the last three reviews I've done have all been these new X-Men series. Out of all of them, I probably enjoyed Wolverine the most. X Factor is probably second to that, and Cable third. But I did recommend all three, and each had their own little bits of value to them that I quite liked. This one is kind of cool because I think it shows the different types of stories we can get out of House of X. Most of them have been pretty straightforward, sci-fi, fantasy-ish action stories, pretty typical of the X-Men. X Factor feels more like what that series was, with the more grounded storylines. Jesus or Jesus Niftali says, "I love X Factor. I hope they introduce Layla again or Madrix. Multiple Man has shown up in other books, but he doesn't quite seem like the same character from X Factor. I agree. I would like to see Layla and the Strong Guy and the rest of that crew a little more, but that's the one point of contention, or the part that I found weird. In an era of X-Men where we're bringing back all the characters, it's a little strange this X Factor team feels so profoundly and systematically different. It just, like, the way the team functions even, and their style is quite different. I wonder, just like, and this thought just occurred to me right now, maybe part of that is because that old X Factor run really was tied to the little block of mutant society they had set up as the setting for X Factor investigations, and I could see that maybe not being able to continue, or like not work as well on the island setting, and because everything's just kind of amped up as a function of House of X, maybe they felt the need to do the same for X Factor. I'm not sure, but if I didn't know anything about that old X Factor run, I would just like this team for what it is, and I don't want to begrudge it too much for just being different. That's not a good reason to dislike it. It's just the one part I was like, that's strange that they're not even, like, it feels like if we were gonna dig back into that team a little bit, Madrox would have to be out of that story, especially. Though I would like to see more of that cast in general. Alejandro Litchi, it just it's hard to read sometimes on that chat thing. It says they need a teleport on the team, maybe Blink, Vanisher, or Ariel. Teleporters are kind of interesting in the world of Krakoa because they have those portals. They are less necessary. Blink would be a great choice. Uh, Vanisher and Ariel too, just because they're relatively less explored. I think in one of the it was in Wolverine. They didn't want all the Russian Krakoan gates are heavily guarded by the Russian government, so not wanting to be spotted, they traveled via Gateway instead, like the mutant gateway. So I think a lot of those teleporters are sort of floating characters that can appear in any given story when they're needed. I'm not totally sure. Now that I think about it, Vanisher would also be really awesome because he's a pretty fun character that would add a cool dynamic to this particular team. So I think you make a great point there, Alejandro. Jesus is saying the new team is something fresh, something new that I would like to follow, but I would at least like cameos of the old members of the team. Yeah, I think that's all we really need, or they could be like secondary characters who are involved or give advice, or we can expand things. I don't know, it's just a strange choice not to really include them all at the ground level, though, and it would be nice to at least have them in a cameo or some sort of appearance going forward, because I've read a lot of these X-Men books across the line, and I haven't seen a great deal of the original X Factor characters anywhere. I mentioned Jamie kind of deliberately because he's the only one I can think of, and I think he just had some random cameo where he needed to dismantle something on the fly while the rest of that was X-Force, I think. The team had to like fight off bad guys while a bunch of Jamies worked on fixing a Krakoan gate. And it was a fun scene, but didn't really have a lot in terms of adding anything to Jamie's character or really making use of the character from X Factor. He was more of just quipping jokes in that little cameo. So yeah, that's well, I was gonna say that's about it, but let's talk a little bit about the artwork. And it's it's really well done because something like this needs to be a little more grounded and such. And I feel like it accomplishes that. There's a lot. The characters are cartoony but quite expressive, which is good for quickly conveying a lot of sequences involving a lot of different characters. The page on here right now kind of shows a bit of North Star's arrogance, where he just butts in line to all these people, begging for their relatives to be resurrected. And throughout this story, North Star is kind of insistent that his sister gets resurrected no matter what. That struck me as a little unfair. Like, why are they special relative to just the thousands and thousands of mutants from Genosha and stuff? I don't see it. And it's still a bit of a question if the Genoshan mutants can even be resurrected. Someone recently commented on one of our X-Men videos about how they would like the X-Men comics to be a little more connected and for them to kind of have these big revelations in different books be felt a little more across the line. I kind of agree sometimes, but I also note that it does happen quite a bit with these cameos and cross appearances, and things do seem to influence each other, especially over time. I think there is a little bit of ambiguity because of the way comics are published, that they sort of, we don't know what order events are explicitly occurring, even with the handy dandy little X-Men reading orders that occur on the back of these books, especially because a lot of these books, unfortunately, weren't really published in the right order due to the pandemic and stuff like that. So I give them a little bit of leeway with all of that as long as the big things do get dwelt on. But it feels like that's true. Kitty Pryde died, or apparently died, in the Marauders series a little while back now, and while that's been teased and dealt with heavily in Marauders, she would keep appearing in other books for a little while after that. Yet, over time, books like Wolverine and hopefully others will start to reflect Kitty Pryde's death and apparent loss. I'm curious to see where that goes, for example, because that so far hasn't been made clear. So, we kind of went off topic a little, well, whatever. But the artwork on the whole is quite good, though, because even though there are cartoony elements, we do get some well-drawn establishing backgrounds and stuff like that, leading to a strong mix of very expressive characters and very detailed, realistic settings. Not like including Krakoa, which is a pretty good example, or which is a pretty good achievement because Krakoa itself is so fantastical. It's kind of cool seeing a lot of their architecture drawn with a lot of detail and thought involved. We get a little shot outside of the Quiet Council, for example, that sort of better establishes that building than how I've seen other artists do it. Same thing with the X Factor headquarters. That works quite well. Yeah, there isn't a lot of detail when you look at the actual characters, but that's because they are more of showing off those facial features and the different characters in different moments. So when Dawkins seducing somebody across like half a page, that gets conveyed very quickly and successfully. Yeah, so I think that's about it in terms of what I had to say about this new series. I, like I said, would recommend it, and we'll probably keep checking it out going forward because I quite enjoyed it. I still have a couple of books to review from last week. Unfortunately, I've just kind of fallen behind a little bit, so I'm going to try and catch up a bit today. So next up, we're going to actually divert a bit from Marvel and X-Men for a while by focusing on an indie book. And we're going to be talking about Black Stars Above, which was quite interesting and a different experience from Vault Comics. And then we'll close out last week's poll with Empire #3, which I still have to get around to talk to. So stay tuned for that, guys. I'll post the next stream shortly, and you'll know when that's happening, but probably around 5:30, and we'll go from there. So we'll see you then. Thanks again for joining me in chat and stuff, and I'll see you guys. And for those of you joining after, please feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts on X Factor below, and we'll see you then here on Comic Island. Thanks, guys.